Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 14 of Low Down on Low Code. And today I think we've got a really great show and one that I've really been looking forward to. Today our guest is Rudy Kuhn of Celonis, and we're gonna start diving into process mining, which I think is an extremely important topic as relates to low code. You'll notice I'm not here with my usual co-host, Brian Dugan. Today we have our newest member of Analysis.tech, Dave Marcus. Hi, Dave. Welcome to Low Down on Low Code as a host and not a guest.
It's great to be on board, and certainly good to be a host for the very first time. Rudy and I go back some time. We'll talk about that a bit later. But I've also been looking forward to this session.
Yeah, this is a good one. I'm going to start with a little bit of personal history, because it involves Rudy. So when I was at Forrester, I was covering digital process automation and really focusing on automation technologies. But I started to see a sea change in the requests that were coming in, the inquiries that were coming in around process mining. I started to see a shift from calls that generally originated in the DACH region. Now all of a sudden they were coming from everywhere. We were seeing them in North America, all over Europe. And a lot of focus on manufacturing, in the early days that I was looking at it. And suddenly it was in financial services, it was in insurance. And I thought I better take a deep dive into this. And I better learn a lot more. And so I reached out to a whole bunch of people just to try to educate me from different companies. And one of which was Rudy Kuhn, who was with Process Gold at the time. And I said, Rudy, can we get together and talk about this? And Rudy said, well, I'm going to be in San Francisco on Monday. So this was a Friday. And sure enough, Monday, Rudy's sitting in my office in San Francisco. And that to me felt like a sign. So that was where I made this decision, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago, to really dive much deeper into process mining as an area of research. But Rudy, so that's my story. It's not very good. How do you come to process mining? I mean, we all grew up wanting to be firefighters or astronauts or professional athletes, and somehow all ended up in automation. Well, how'd you come to this, Rudy?
Well, probably because I didn't want to be a firefighter, but I wanted to become a superhero when I was a little boy. And, my favorite superhero was always Superman. This guy, he was strong, he could fly, and he had this one very special superpower. I, as a teenage boy, thought would be really handy, the superpower of X-ray vision. Of course, later I realized there's nothing you can study at university, so I did business and economics, and then I became a consultant with IBM. And and my job wasn't to save the world, but to help companies to be more efficient and to run better business processes and to use IT in a better way. And so, I ended up analyzing business processes, sitting in these process mapping workshops, listening to people, knowing exactly that not everything they tell me is completely true, simply because they don't know what the real processes are. And again, I remembered Superman, and I wished I would have this superpower of X-ray vision so I can simply look at an organization and instantly, know what's going on. And then, after being consulting for a couple of years, back in 2009, I traveled to the beautiful country of the Netherlands. So I was based in Germany at that time. And I met, a guy who invented this technology or this superpower called process mining, Professor Dr. Will van der Aalst. And I realized, if this really works, it's going to change the way we, or at least I am looking at business processes forever. So that was 15 years ago. And since that, I'm still, very, very passionate about this technology. And it's great to see, from the humble beginnings where it is now. So this is how I ended up in process mining, because I wanted to become a superhero.
So it is interesting. And this sort of speaks to like our place in the world, that when you meet Will van der Aalst, you're starstruck, right? So I'm sure that in the grand scheme of things, most people want to meet Taylor Swift or something like that, but in our world it's Will. And I still have my first selfie that I took with Will at Spellosphere, I don't know, many years ago. Dave, I'm conflicted here because last week you were our RPA expert, and now you're back on process mining. So tell us about where you came into this area of process mining and a little bit about your past and your interest here.
Yeah, so kind of the way this works goes back a couple of years before I met Rudy. I happened to be talking fairly extensively to an analyst called Mark Keremans, based out of Europe, who's part of who's today still part of Gartner. And Mark and I started having a lot of discussion about this whole concept of, like, I'm going to call it process analysis at the time, versus process automation, and how these two things came together, where it was interesting. When I joined UiPath, it became a little clearer that you cannot just automate for automation's sake. You need to automate for some really good reasons. And more importantly, you need to optimize for good reasons. And process optimization is not always about automation. We'll come back to that. And so then what ended up happening is, as part of the evolution of the work I was doing on the strategy team at UiPath, we started looking at, hey, how are we going to actually handle this area of what we were calling process discovery at the time? And it became really clear that we couldn't just go and build something. It didn't make any sense. And so going out to go and find an appropriate acquisition was the right approach to make. We spent a bit of time doing a bunch of due diligence. And a couple of months before the Process Gold acquisition was kind of where I met Rudy for the first time. And then subsequently, we've worked extensively together during my time at UiPath, because there was this really great connection, if you like, between someone who could talk the world of process intelligence optimization and someone who could talk the world of automation, how those two aligned together and what it ultimately meant. And we'll come back to that a bit later. But that's kind of my history, both of process mining as well as working with Rudy.
That's great. That's great, Dave. So let me take a different direction here. So I live in Oakland, California. I often drive to San Francisco, California for quite a while. There were huge Celonis billboards as I went across the Bay Bridge that said, XYZ Corporation saved $1 trillion, using Celonis. And, I don't remember what the exact number was, but guys, tee it up. I want to start with Rudy and tee up the question. Why, as an enterprise, do I need to broadly think about process mining? What has brought this to the forefront of our thinking over the last few years? Let's start with you, Rudy.
Yeah, probably, I always paint the picture. I love biking, and a couple of years back, I had a really bad accident on the road, and I, got away with some broken arm, and I ended up in the hospital. And of course, so the first thing they did was to perform some X-ray on me to find out how bad the damage is, where the pain really comes from, and to find out how to fix the problem. And that's exactly what process mining does for business processes. So the way it works, we connect to system of records, SAP, workflow, you name it. Basically, every single system we are using in business today, every transaction, every posting of a document, every payment, every approval, everything you do leaves digital footprints behind. And we use this data to, in reverse, reconstruct the real processes and to understand what's really happening, to look, under the surface and to learn the things nobody can tell you, either because they don't want you to know how bad the situation is or because they really don't know. And if you don't know what the problem is, how are you supposed to fix it? So for transparency reason, we need process mining because we live in a digital world. We are digitizing more and more and more of our processes and business. And process mining is the only way to understand, what's really going on, because if a process is digital, you can't see it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Rudy, I would add just a really objectivity and the ability to do it at scale were the things that always struck out to me. It's that there could be the trails in the systems, the system logs do not lie. They are objective, and we can do it at scale. Dave, what are your thoughts on the topic?
Right.
I completely agree with, look, Rudy's been doing this for many, many, many years, longer than I have, both in a consultative role as well as with vendors. So the one thing I did want to ask Rudy, just for the audience we have here, is often I found that people get confused between the world of process mining and the world of what I'm going to call traditional process analytics. BI on processes.
Yeah.
And so maybe it'd be useful for you just to spend a minute or so just clarifying the difference from your perspective between those two, because it's often something that I found people get confused about.
Yeah, I know it's confusing, but it's really related, because business intelligence and process mining are very strong together. So the first process mining applications I have seen only were able to visualize the process. And, for the first time, you saw all the exceptions, all the variations, and you realized, oh my gosh, we have cases, or let's say invoices bypassing mandatory approval steps. So that's good to know that this happened. But the next question always was, okay, how often does it happen? Who are the suppliers? What's the total value? And that's, the field of business intelligence. So basically, process mining is like business intelligence or on steroids, or business or process-oriented business intelligence. So the thing is, you have the process on one side. So you realize, something is wrong in your process. You click on this exception, like, the bypassing of mandatory approval steps, and next to it, you see the numbers. How many cases? Or you see the statistics and you realize some of your variations or some of your cases take exceptionally long to be processed. Far too long to meet your expectations or the expectations of your customers or business partners. So you click on these cases and it will visualize the process and it will show you where the bottlenecks are. So this switching from process to numbers and numbers to process, that's what makes process mining really unique. And of course, we use all the BI technology in place, but we add the process visualization. Basically, we explain the root cause why these numbers are as they are.
So, Rudy, I'm going to throw something out, and for you as well, Dave. So the podcast is called Low Down on Low Code, right? That is what we think about. And to me, these concepts of process mining, process insight, automation, and low code are inextricably bound, right? And at the beginning, I was also always very apologetic around saying automation isn't always the answer. And over the last few years, I've shifted that to tell me when you wouldn't automate. There are absolutely instances where you wouldn't automate, but we need to think about automation in much broader terms. So with that in mind, maybe I can start with you, Dave, on this one and say, okay, what in your minds is the connection between process mining and this whole concept of low code automation and automating at scale?
Sure. So the way I think about it is one of the big attributes and the reasons that people choose low code technology, whether that be a platform or RPA or any other low code capability, is largely not just about the ability to ultimately end up automating things or creating these new class business applications but are all about efficiency. And the reason that people choose a low-code approach is because they can be more efficient, more effective, quicker time to delivery, and everything else that goes along with it. I think the same thing applies for what I'm going to call the pre and post experience. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you need a way of being able to say, firstly, what do I actually go and prioritize? Because there are many things that I could work on in an organization to improve, the efficiency of processes of parts of the business or the business as a whole as part of my transformation efforts. But a lot of the way that's historically been done in past times is by just throwing a lot of very expensive, very complex business analysts at the problem, and they go and spend a lot of time with people. Hopefully they get the right answer and they go and do the work, but it could take years for this to happen, and it's extremely expensive. So the way I think about process mining on the one hand is at the front of the process effort, it's all about a way of being able to say, how do we optimize and prioritize the things that we're ultimately going to apply our low-code capabilities to delivering and driving more automation in the business. The second way I think about it is when you've done that work, you need to continue to optimize. You don't necessarily get an understanding of the fact that automation is going to be the be-all and end-all. You need to understand what's happening. Now you have a new system of record. I'm going to call it the automation system of record. And that automation system record needs to be part of a bigger set of things, because that automation system is tying in with an ERP system, with a CRM system, with supply chain, and everything else that goes along there. So it becomes a new system of record for the process mining technology to evaluate, to assess, so that you can continue to optimize what you're doing. So it really applies both pre-process as well as post-automation. I think the other thing I just want to make a really quick point on, and Rudy can elaborate further on this as well. It isn't just about automation as an outcome. I would say at UiPath, and also if you look at Microsoft, in many ways, people have sort of made an assumption that the outcome of a process mining initiative is automation. It may be, but it also might be that an outcome of a process mining initiative is just change some configurations inside my SAP system, and just modify some attributes of my Salesforce system in order to make that effective, or just help me to advise people on how to be able to do some of the things that they need to do manually in a more effective manner. That may be an outcome, and that's a perfectly viable outcome. So It isn't necessarily just all about automation.
Fantastic point, Dave. And I want to come back to that in just a second, because I think embedded in that was a really, really important concept that I want to hit on in just a sec. Rudy, what are your thoughts on this connection between process mining and this low-code process automation initiatives that we're all involved in?
Yeah, I think the initial idea of, in the past, we have seen a couple of acquisitions by automation companies acquiring process mining companies. So UiPath was not the only one. They were the first, but not the only one. And frankly, I think that process mining is not the magic wand for automation, because the reason is, if we talk about processes, process mining and process automation, it sounds very similar, right? It sounds like the match made in heaven, because we all care about processes. The only challenge sometimes is that we need to define what we mean by process. Processes happen on all levels. If you think about the value creation process of a car manufacturing company, from design, engineering, manufacturing, sales, service, if you go into the details, you will realize that sales is a process on its own, and even the creation of a purchase or of a purchase order or a quote is a process on its own. And when we as process miners look at processes, we think about processes end to end, purchase to pay, order to cash. When RPA vendors talk about processes, sometimes for them the process is copying data from an Excel sheet into an SAP form. And it makes completely sense to automate this sub-process. If you do it like 20 times a day, please save the time, don't be a robot, automate it. So RPA is a great technology. The only challenge is it's not about process automation, at least not in my definition of a process. But, once you realize that you have some bottlenecks in your process, first thing, first solution or the best way to approach it is not automation. Don't automate problems. If you discover you have a bottleneck, try to eliminate it. If you cannot eliminate it because it's an approval step and you unfortunately need it to manage risk, try to simplify. If you can simplify, try to standardize, so it always runs the same way. And then, and only then, consider automation, because then it makes sense. And process mining in combination, and maybe we talk about this later, with task mining will show you how to do that. But again, for me, the real, let's say, value of process mining in the context of automation is not necessarily the discovery of automation opportunities, because as we said, not everything can be solved with automation. But it's more what I call situational awareness, because real-time process mining in real time on the systems, on the processes, so we can detect any issue. An invoice being incorrectly processed, check that approved by the same person, typically segregation duty violation. So what we can do, we can now, use, for example, trigger a low-code bot and have this invoice being blocked in the SAP system, and then notify someone to recheck and reapprove this invoice. So with low code, we can create all kind of countermeasures for all exceptions, for all inefficiencies, and in this way really create automated or almost autonomous processes. So use process mining for observability and use low code technology for actionability. And this combination is so powerful. That's my view on it.
I think that's a fantastic view, Rudy, and we should probably bust that out as a separate little piece that we can give to our audience, because that was just brilliant. I do want to probe. I want to get to the task mining, process mining thing in just a sec. Bounce that off with both of you guys, but I do want to probe on this a little bit more, because we've sort of opened this Pandora's box. So, Process Gold gets bought by UiPath, Mayan Video gets bought by IBM, Lana Labs, Appian, Microsoft. The list goes on, right? I'm old, so I can't do a comprehensive list anymore. But suffice to say, right, that Signavio and SAP. Gosh, I forgot a big one. Suffice to say that they have these really interesting tools right now. And should I be skeptical of that sort of approach that almost begins to look like an integrated stack that says my insights lead to my automation tools? Is this something our audience should be skeptical of, right? And maybe I'll start with you, Dave, because I know you spent a lot of time with the Mayan and Microsoft team. And let me just say, let's just sort of say, when automation is the answer and Mayan has a discovery, is Microsoft's automation platform always the right answer? So, I'm putting on my skeptic hat and asking you guys if it's right that I should be doing that.
So I personally think, Rob, that every vendor who initially invests in process mining technology, whether it be through a partnership, but more importantly through acquisitions, always has this initial view that this technology is going to be a way of being able to ultimately drive more automations with their own automation technology stack. And I think that, on the one hand, it's sort of a selfish point of view, but it's also a point of view that makes sense for that particular vendor. It doesn't necessarily make sense for the end customer in all circumstances. It's for two reasons. Number one, the one we mentioned earlier, where not all outcomes of a process mining initiative are automations. But there's also a fair statement to say many outcomes of process mining initiative for automation may very well be not necessarily best delivered with that automation technology. It is not unusual for that to happen. We talked about this last week. If I'm an insurance company and I'm focusing on process mining initiative on my end-to-end claims process, and I define that I have huge problems across the entire claims process that requires me to perform significant optimization and significant automation at a very complex level, I probably am not going to choose RPA as my vehicle to be able to do that. And by default, I'm probably also not going to choose I'm going to call this a somewhat fledgling technology like Microsoft Power Automate to do the same thing either. I'm going to pick a more comprehensive automation capability to help me to solve that problem from wherever the vendor might be that requires to do that. I also think that, and Rudy will tell you this is the case, and we learned this, certainly I learned this at UiPath. You make an assumption that says, when you buy a process mining technology as an automation vendor, that you can just go and introduce this to your automation center of excellence, and they're just going to naturally adopt, and things are going to be beautiful. And you very, very quickly learn that actually the audience for process mining isn't dominantly an automation vendor. Isn't dominantly an automation center of excellence. Yeah. It is often a transformation center of excellence or an owner of a set of processes within the business, and they're the ones that really care about this. And so you take a pride that you have to have a very different both selling and engagement and value cycle to the one that is all about, I'm just talking about automation. So that's sort of the way I think about it. There is no doubt that having a capability like this as a vendor in automation is a useful thing, because it gives you an ability of being able to play at more of the front end of the cycle rather than just leave that to someone else. And only when an automation comes into play are you brought into play. So there's certainly value in being able to do that. But at the end of the day, the flip side is also true. It is not necessarily the case that one leads to a use of the same vendor's technology as the outcome.
Rudy, you thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. So what made me leave UiPath was that, I have a consulting background, you know this. And for me, thinking only automation is not the solution. I always make the joke that nobody wants to automate fraud. We discovered cross-money. It would scale so nicely, but no, nobody wants to automate it. Okay, so we have to eliminate it. No, don't get me wrong. Automation is a great solution. I'm still a big fan of it, but it has its place. And as Dave said, you need to be open about how you solve the problem you discover. In Germany, we say that for a hammer, every problem is a nail. And it shouldn't be like that. If it's a screw, you need a screwdriver and not a hammer. And, there's a new technology around the block, and it's called process orchestration. And maybe we talk about this later, or maybe in another session, but process orchestration to me really is like, and we have a new product in this sector, because process orchestration really has the capability to orchestrate all systems, different technology, different bots, and the humans in long-running workflows with variations, with different scenario, back and front end systems. So really, process orchestration sounds or is the tool that is capable to deliver on the promise that RPA gave, but never could deliver the end-to-end automation. So, RPA, in my humble opinion, should be called RTA, Robotics Task Automation, because that's what it really does. But if you stitch together enough of this technology from multiple vendors sometimes, and that's typically what we see with big customers, and you add, a little bit of AI and humans in the loop and everything, you really end up with a highly automated and completely orchestrated and very efficient end-to-end process. So that's a different angle where, we are working on currently.
Yeah, and it's also extrapolated from all of those line of business systems that you've invested in. So you can run processes across those legacy systems, across those organizational boundaries. So orchestration is definitely a topic that we'll continue to hit on during the course of Low Down on Low Code. But I want to go back to one comment, and I think this is one that might be a source of confusion for the audience. When I was still at Forrester, Bernhard and Schaffrick, and I used a visual metaphor for the difference between process mining and task mining. He said process mining was the highway. We can see it laid out in the system logs, and there's a whole bunch of work that goes off on the off ramps, right? You take the off ramp and you go and you use something there, and that's happening on the desktop. They are wildly different technology bases in order to make this happen, but the stitching together of these two is actually the true end-to-end view of how a process actually executes within my organization. Rudy, you've been with a couple of different prominent companies, and Celonis has been working on this for a while. Where and how are these two worlds going to be stitched together? Are they going to be stitched together?
Well, again, it's about the purpose. You can use process mining to optimize business processes, or you can try to use process mining to find automation opportunities. And it's a little bit with the safe task mining. So you can use task mining to better understand what your workforce is working on, really to get an overview. How much time do they spend on which screen? How much time do they spend in Excel, in SAP, or any other system? Or you can use task mining to better understand really, for example, how how an invoice is processed, with the target to automate these activities. So let's say you do process mining first, and you realize, okay, now let's stick to this example. Processing an invoice takes too much time. Why? Because in SAP you find only one timestamp after this activity is finished. So you can ask the people working on this issue or working on this task, please, next time you process an invoice, click the start button, record every single step, every click, every keystroke, every screen. After you finish, hit stop again. you collect these recordings from multiple people because you know that they work sometimes a little bit differently, and you want to find out, what are the variations, maybe what's the best way how to process an invoice. You look at it, it's very, very similar to process mining, but you get the data from the front end, from front-end applications. And then once you have found out what the best way is, you can import this, maybe in this case to the UiPath Studio, and you have your bot up and running in almost no time. So it's a little, you can use task mining a little like the Office macro recorder on steroids, and it's a great way. Really connecting the cases from process mining with task mining on the case level, like, that's the invoice we process in the process. And now I want to see how this invoice, what people did in the front end. That's a little bit difficult because sometimes in the front end, you don't see the mandatory case study. So you can only ask people, please record everything you do. You can look for the patterns, but technically and data-wise, connecting process mining and task mining, that's a challenge. For me, it's like a two-step approach. First, get transparency about the end-to-end process, like in macro view, and then you realize something is wrong or something takes too long, and then take the microscope or the magnifying glass and look closer. And then you understand, okay, why is this a bottleneck? What's really going on? And you can decide, do I want to automate this task? Is it even possible or is it not possible? So that's, we use task mining to better understand and to, go for automation, or you use task mining. And, the tools are called the same, but they are not really the same. So there's a little different approach because, again, a hammer is a hammer, but there are sledgehammers and there are medical hammers, and, don't use the wrong one. And you can use task mining really to understand the workforce or how your people are working. So that's a different approach. Sorry, I know that was a bit longer answer, but it can be very confusing.
It was a good answer, and I appreciate it. And I think the piece you kind of talked about it, they're wildly different technology bases, right? So even though the output often kind of to the trained eye output is the same, wildly different technologies that enable them. I want to close out the way we generally close out, but I think it's a particularly relevant question here in the area of process mining. I'd love to sort of, I'd like to get, both Dave and your opinions on this, Rudy. I'd love to go back to the superhero Will and get his thinking on this at some point as well. But where is let's start with you, Dave. Where is AI going to take the world of process mining? This just seems like a natural area where there can be some massive advances.
Sure. So my perspective is, firstly, the one benefit you get out of process mining is you have an insane amount of data, and you have context to that data. And so if there's one thing that AI does really well when applied appropriately, you give it a lot of data, you give it some really, really good context, and it can do really interesting things in terms of giving you insight into things that you may not necessarily have been able to do in your own right because it's just so much data. Or alternatively, things that you can do better. So I think there are a few things, and Rudy can comment on this in a much deeper way because he's directly involved in this right now. The first one is it does allow you to take all this information, and instead of just giving you a visual representation of what you have, it gives you better insight into what's happening inside that visual representation. Because it knows certain things. It knows how to analyze. So, whether it's a large language model or whether it's, generalized AI machine learning technology, you can apply this to all that information to be able to say, look, instead of just giving me a visual view that I have to interpret, you interpret things for me. Tell me where things are happening. Compare it to the industry norms. Come up with those kinds of things that I wouldn't ultimately be able to do in my own right as an analyst, for instance, or even as a business owner. Or if I would, it would just take me a ton of time. And so apply the technology in that way. I do think that, to Rudy's point, it also kind of comes back to how to create things like next best action, et cetera, in some really interesting ways. So it's not just about analyzing the data, interpreting it, and providing context, but it also provides the ability to almost sort of create a view that says, here's how I should think about being able to apply this insight that I have and what to ultimately do about it. So, that's my view.
That's great, Dave. Thank you. Rudy, how disruptive and how powerful is this going to be in the world of process mining?
Oh, very much. So, there are multiple ways how to use AI, any kind of AI in the context of process mining. So a very, let's say, simple or very common way is to support developers. So instead of writing, PQL code and designing dashboards, you simply tell the system what you want and it will create the dashboard for you so you can then work on it. Well, that's rather simple. Much more amazing or fascinating for me is, if you go on the internet and you ask ChatGPT, okay, how do I improve a purchasing process? Of course, it will give you some answers. Unfortunately, these answers are not related to your situation. It's just, from the textbook. It's from the content and ChatGPT, learned from. So if you want meaningful answers that are really related and specific for your situation, for your organization, you need to feed such a system with your data. And process mining really is like the Rosetta Stone, because we get data from all the different applications. We are collecting all the process data and the digital footprints from multiple applications. So we know exactly what the process looked like, and now take all this data, feed it into an internal chat GPT system. So let it learn from your processes, and then it will really help you to with your process, with your situation or in your situation. And we have a co-pilot. Of course, we have a co-pilot. Everybody has a co-pilot. But the co-pilot we have is pretty smart. You can simply go in and ask, hey, what are the 3 major problems in my purchasing process? And it will tell you. And now you can ask, oh, okay. So this KPI in this region is bad. What's the root cause? And it will come with some answers. And it will even give you some proposals. How can you improve the situation? So it's almost like a digital assistant, like a digital consultant. Many years back, someone said that process mining will replace consultants. And I thought, oh, come on, that's bullshit. That's never going to happen. Like X-ray cannot replace the doctor. Of course not. But with the support of AI, it's a real assistant. So you can chat with the Celonis process mining system, ask questions, and you get back meaningful answers that will really help you to drive value and increase the situation. And it's all about value. I mean, we don't do this for fun. And over the last couple of years, we always ask our customers, what's the value you get out of it? And that's a tough question. And we ask them really to sign it off. And the feedback we got so far is, customers confirmed that we have realized value for them of over $5 billion. So that's a lot of money.
That's kind of fun.
Rudy, just a quick question to sort of add to what Rob just asked earlier. And as we finish off, you've been talking a lot about the sort of evolution of process mining from focusing on individual processes to this idea of sort of business mining. And so, how do you see that, as well as the sort of role of AI in really helping organizations think about this as a key part of their overall transformation initiatives?
So the professor I mentioned, Professor Dr. Will van der Aalst, he invented the next level of process mining. It's called object-centric process mining. For process mining, typically you focus on one type of document. Like you take the invoice number and you track the invoice number through the process. But that doesn't represent your business, because your business is not just one process. As I mentioned in the beginning, your process is the combination of all the interwoven and interconnected processes. And with this object-centered process mining, to be honest, I don't like the term because it's very academic. It's very technical. Think about it like a shift from process mining, where you don't look at one process only, to business mining, because business is the other interconnected processes. And maybe you realize that in your manufacturing process, something is running, one manufacturing order is running late, and you wonder why. You analyze the manufacturing process, but maybe the reason is, in the purchasing process, because some of the material you require was delivered late. So if we now connect all the processes, we have full transparency, not just, end-to-end process, but really end-to-end business. And we feed this into a large process model. It's a little bit like a large language model. It's very similar. And then you can really ask very complex questions about the whole process chain in your organization. So that's really like the next level. It's very complicated. So AI is a great way, to deal with these situations and use this technology basically to avoid problems before they even arise. So with this, we are in predictive maintenance, we are in predictive, process management, and I'm fully convinced that, that's the way, or the technology that will pave the path to autonomous enterprise, autonomous processes. And for me, this is going to be a mission-critical exercise in the future. It's a vision which will take us some time, but we'll get there.
So we're very excited in the short term to learn more about Copilot. Some of what I learned today on the podcast was new to me. I'd love to get with Celonis and find out more about that. Also very excited about the longer term vision, Will's longer term vision. So I want to thank Rudy Kuhn today. Rudy's the lead transformation evangelist at Celonis. Amazing insights. And I'm so happy to say this. Thanking our new team member, Dave Marcus, for joining us today. So delighted to have Dave as part of Analysis.Tech. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next Low Down on Low Code.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Robin. As
It was a
always,
pleasure
really, thanks again.
being with you today, and hope to see you soon in person again.